There is a different type of modality from a treatment standpoint called HILT, or high intensity laser therapy. That actually can overheat tissue, especially if you're applying it for too long. But our devices, we stay in the LLLT kind of range and of power delivery, because again, we want to do no harm and start from there and then start adding the benefits in for the users.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Thrive State Podcast. I am your host, Dr. B, Triple Four Certified MD and Performance and Longevity Expert. And on today's podcast, Let There Be Light, I am going to share with you one of my very favorite biohacks that I travel with all the time. You know, I talk about on this show, you being your best medicine. I really do believe that we have the capacity within us to tap into purpose, to tap into love, to tap into these energetic states that help heal our body. I am not against technology. I'm just saying that the people who live in the blue zones don't have access to any of this stuff. So technology has been super pivotal in the role of biohacking and elevating human potential. A lot of the biohacks these days actually leverage energy that we've used for centuries to activate parts of our body for health and healing. One of them being light. And on today's podcast, you're going to learn about light and what actually it does for the body and how we could actually remove systemic inflammation as well as pain in our body using light. So if you've got pain, if you've got systemic inflammation, if you've got stress and potentially want to heal your gut, you're going to want to pay attention, because there's a lot of content today that will take you, your health, and your life to the next level. Now, if you are just joining us for the first time, this is Dr. Boo. I am your host in this show where I interview world thought leaders and experts in health, wellness, epigenetics, longevity, biohacking, relationships sometimes, because it all has to do with our human potential. How do we reach that? Guests from the show give you those answers. And if you're returning to the show, if you are enjoying the content here, please do us a favor, help the show grow. Subscribe to the podcast, share this podcast with your friends and family members, and leave us a 5-star review wherever podcasts are heard. That's really going to help the show. And as a huge thank you to you, I want to give you a bunch of resources. We actually have ebooks, breathwork practices, lecture notes from my keynotes that I deliver all around the world, all to give you a jump start in your performance, your longevity, your path to human potential. So you get that all by going to ThriveStageStarter.com, completely free longevity and performance resource guide, as a big thank you for being a part of our community. Now on to today's podcast guest. He's actually somebody I've gotten a chance to really know. He's got a really great and beautiful heart, but he's also a super big nerd, and he's going to nerd out today. And that's what I love about him. He's deep in the science, and he's very meticulous. And you'll just see from his passion over the details. And he's somebody that's in the space that has really done the work of science to really bring about technology that moves the needle when it comes to our health and our performance. And on today's podcast, we do photobiomodulation, which is light therapy 101. We're going to give you all the basics, what you need to know, and how to use it to improve pain, how to improve your overall health. And we'll also dive into some of the new science and the new products that are coming out. It is very seldom that I get really excited about the launch of products, but there are 2 products in the pipeline, one for the gut, one for the vagus nerve, that's about to launch, and they're doing a huge launch that you could be a part of. So listen to the end of the podcast to learn how you can get in on these really awesome, revolutionary products at the end of the podcast. Now on to our guest today. He is somebody I got a chance to know recently, super knowledgeable guy, and he speaks Chinese better than me. He's the CEO of Kineon, Forrest Smith. And as a technologist, he's built innovative engineering and supply chain teams that anchored the value for multiple successful exits. He's passionate about health, wellness, and advancing technology to improve the quality of life for many people. He's also played competitive sports. The Olympics was on right now, but he was a junior national Olympics team handball. Man, I just discovered handball on this Olympics, and it is no joke of a sport. He now regularly plays rugby matches and trains with CrossFit, which ultimately led him to develop Kineon's Move Plus Pro targeted laser therapy device. It's a device I use everywhere I travel, and you're going to find out more about why this device is one of the state of the art when compared to other red light therapy devices that are out there. During this podcast, you're really going to discover a human being with a very sincere heart to solve really big problems in the world. What are the technologies that are out there, and how do we move the needle on them? And it's this mindset that I find so captivating about him. So enjoy this. You're going to get a lot of science, but you're going to get it from a place, from a person that cares deeply about human health. And you're also going to learn about some really new, exciting technology that's on the pipeline. So enjoy this conversation with myself and Forrest Smith. Forrest Smith, welcome to the Thrive State Podcast.
Love to be here with you. Thank you for having me.
Forrest, we got introduced probably through some mutual friends like Ben Greenfield or something like that, but you have such a amazing and very interesting life that I'm going to hopefully bring together on this show here. And just your zest for wanting to solve world health problems is very admirable. So thanks for being on.
Thank you so much. It's an exciting space to be in, and I love talking about it, so hopefully I don't bore you today.
All right, so we do a portion of the show called the 5 to Thrive. It's game show style. It can be very, very stressful because the winner gets a healthy meal on me the next time we meet. Each question is 1,000 points. Each wrong answer, you suffer very huge consequences. Knowing that, are you ready to end the
Let's do it. Let's do it.
All right.
Public humiliation if I get it wrong. It's a tough scale there.
Question number 1 is, when did you learn Chinese and what made you start?
I started learning Chinese 13 years old in 9th grade. I was lucky enough to be a part of a international baccalaureate program when I was young in school, coming into high school, and I loved it. There was 2 4-year programs, and I wanted to select a 4-year program for my school because I felt like if I don't have 4 years, then my potential for keeping it and actually learning the language enough to speak is not high. And so they had a very interesting program for Arabic, but most of the guys coming out of the Arabic program were going into policy. And they had a program for Chinese, which was unusual. And the guys coming out of the Chinese program were going for business studies and commercial studies, and that sounded much more up my alley. And so I started studying. I did 4 years of Chinese in high school and really loved it, including a trip when I think my first trip to China, I was about 16 or 17, to Nanjing University and did a semester there. So that's what locked it in for me. I loved it. That was the late 90s, and had a great time in China before it was open, and really enjoyed that and knew I'd be going back.
Very nice. 我必须要讲国语. Cantonese.
Okay.
Question number 2 is, what dream did you have as a child of being or doing, of having?
I've always been intrigued or curious about the world. So I wanted to travel and see everything, that humans live in a million different ways, or 6 or 7 billion now, if you think of it as an N of 1. And I really felt like travel could kind of broaden my horizons for that and give me a view to what the human experience is, and allow me to connect with people in a better way. And so I've been, kind of building my businesses since I was 21. Lucky enough to have done millions of miles of flying around the world, and tons of different travel in different continents, and really been able to connect with people across a number of different backgrounds and languages, and it's been super gratifying, and kind of was my childhood dream. So it's
well,
coming to life.
You are living the dream, so to speak.
Yes.
Question number 3 is, we all have moments in life where this thing happens, either a circumstance, an event happens, a diagnosis, a quote or book that we read that's been very pivotal. Can you suggest one of those times in your life where life completely changed after that?
it wasn't necessarily a quote or a book, but and I think we actually talked a little bit about this in our last discussion. In my mid 30s, I had achieved some level of kind of career focused success. We built some businesses and sold them and done okay with that. But I looked down at myself, my physiology. I was overweight. I was anxious. I was unhappy. I was overworking in a way, and I don't think that heavy work is a bad thing, but I think, one of the things that really lines up with one of the principles that you've really kind of put into your training is purpose. When you believe in the purpose of what you're doing, you can't really overwork. And I as much as what we were doing intrigued me, it wasn't my purpose to be doing that. And I felt that. I felt the overwork because of that. And it really changed my life to look at myself, having always been an athlete, always been in competitive sports, and to be overweight and anxious and with a number of different physiological kind of red flags. That awakening, there was just one day where I kind of looked at myself and I'm like, this is not who I am. And so kind of since then, again, that was my mid 30s. I'm in my mid 40s now. My goal that I set for myself at that time was every 5 years, I should perform better physically than I did the 5 years before that. And so far I've been on track. I actually at the age of 40 set myself some pretty high goals for the age of 45. So hopefully I can continue to improve. And it just makes you, it kind of puts things in perspective from a higher level standpoint as to what are you doing on a daily basis and how does that put you on track for a healthy outcome and really moving the needle in key performance areas. And there's always a way to measure it differently, but I think, one of the ones that I measured then and I continue to measure, although I change these metrics as they go, is strength, cardiovascular and cardiopulmonary health, and the ability to do intense work without injury. And so kind of like how robust I am as a kind of driving around in my meat machine, as it were. So yeah, it's when you put things like that and when you start measuring them, it's the old Peter Drucker thing of, what gets measured gets managed and what gets managed gets done. The putting metrics to what you're trying to do physiologically actually has helped quite a lot. And then, if you look up in any given, 1 to 3 month period, you can say, I have or I have not been progressing myself towards, what is important to me.
3,000 points thus far, minus 50 points for going over time limits, but you can get it back by answering the last two questions in less than 10 seconds each.
All right.
The next question is, if I were to give you a mic and have you sing a song in front of 100,000 people, what song would you sing?
So karaoke is big in China. I've done quite a lot of it. My go-to is Billie Jean, Michael Jackson. Okay. Right. Everybody likes MJ. He's a classic, and so it gets everybody up and moving. So it's a nice one, even if you don't sing well, which I don't.
Okay, and is there a Chinese song that's your go-to?
月亮代表我的心, I guess would be a kind of.
All right. You actually got the bonus points back over there. He's right at 4,000 points. The last question is, how does Forrest Smith want to be remembered?
That's a great question. And 10 seconds is a tough ask, but I would like to be remembered as having positively impacted everyone I came in contact with in the most meaningful way I could. And I think you can't really ask for much more than that. And it's a hard thing to achieve.
Oh, that's so beautiful. Thank you for that. And I can't wait to dive in a little bit here. Your science mind, people could just tell from the first three answers how deep you go in terms of, addressing a problem, but like really fine tuning all the details to get it right. And certainly this is something that I found when I use the Move Plus Pro from Kineon. I really feel like there has been a lot of thought put into something that has been so compact and so efficacious to use, and which is very unlike, the big panel red light therapies and things like that. So we'll get into red light in a second, but I just wanted to point that out initially, just to point out the type of mind you are, just how meticulous, how detail-oriented, and what you just said about really just impacting. I think you think of the everyday person when you make solutions. Is that your approach to solving the type of problems that you see in the world today?
100%. That's exactly what we're trying to do. And this business, my partner Tom and I actually, before we even started in on deciding what kind of product or technology we wanted to build, we made the mission. And the mission for us is to increase the quality of life for the largest number of people we can in the most substantial way we can. And so every single decision, whenever we have any level of uncertainty, which happens on a daily basis, whether it's marketing or product design or, you name it, from a strategic or tactical standpoint for the business, if we ever lose focus of that, that's the first thing we come back to and say, how is this going to impact people, and how is this going to improve quality of life? And we've tried to focus our teams as much as we can on the high leverage points around that. And with laser therapy, it's dosing. And so we've spent tens of thousands of hours understanding how dosing works and how light diffuses and disperses within tissue, and a number of things that didn't exist when we started this company. So, not just with us, but also with the medical literature or other companies doing this from a commercial standpoint. So I feel like we're trying to put our time in the best places possible for what it's going to be from an outcome standpoint for our users.
Yeah. Probably 10 years ago, people would be thinking, oh, light therapy, this is the biggest snakes oil that's out there. But I mean, if we intuitively talk about it, I think the world's starting to wake up. The world's starting to understand that, human beings, cellular life, we're all energetic beings, and every single cell that exists on the planet has receptors to interact with its energetic environment that choose it how to behave. So it's all energy. So that's what, my book primarily is about. But please allow us to understand maybe, photobiomodulation a little bit. Did you decide on the Kineon product and the Move Plus Pro because red light therapy was something that you found could be improved and you had some results doing it before, or were you wanted to solve the problem of pain first? Well, how did you guys come up with basically the first concept for your product?
The main thing is we were trying to find the biggest gap that we can fill between what exists and what could exist. And how we define that and how photobiomodulation came into the picture for that is there's a number and particularly when we came out with our first device, there were a number of clinical level devices that were dosing patients very effectively, but they were $30,000 to $150,000. And what that means is they're going to be located in an office in a clinical setting where people can come and use them once a week, once 2 weeks, once a month. And this type of technology has the potential to replace opioids, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, and to really get people away from these physiologically damaging pharmaceutical solutions if they use it on a daily basis. So we made the assumption that we can take, we made the assumption, but we made the target for ourselves to take clinical devices, keep the level of dosing that is optimal there, and then turn it into something that reduces friction points for, can we take a $30,000 device, keep the lasers in it, get it past regulatory, get it down below $500, make it wearable, make it something that people can use on a daily basis and stack habits so they don't have to sit in with a doctor or clinician to be able to do this necessarily. Although we do see a lot of clinicians using our devices in clinic now, and it's been a great thing for them to be able to send home with patients to continue the inflammation reduction. So, as an example, a lot of the PTs and chiropractors, if they have somebody coming in, they have a very low hit rate for the number of guys that they send home with therapy and with rehab that actually do it, because what will happen is people will trigger inflammation and pain in their joints and their shoulder and the tissue they're rehabbing. But if you can send them home with the rehab work plus a device that reduces that pain and allows them to continue on with this, they see people staying engaged with their training programs, with their rehab programs, and coming back into the office in the clinical setting much more. But for us, it was just reducing the friction, get this onto people, let them know that they have an empowering option. You don't have to take these drugs that are going to degrade your cartilage even worse, or give you stomach lining problems or liver problems, get you addicted. This opioid crisis is a disaster. Give people an option that they can actually be empowered to reduce the pain and get back into movement.
Okay, now I want to get into Light 101.
All right.
Let's break it down a little bit for people. I mean, light is a form of energy. There's lots of different wavelengths of light. So let's talk a little bit about photobiomodulation, which is using specific wavelengths performing certain biological processes. Can you kind of break down these wavelengths and then, Then we could talk about the red and everything around the red, but just give us the big full spectrum of phototherapy in general, and then we'll start to narrow it down a little bit.
Absolutely. So there's for phototherapy, you see everything in visible light, essentially plus infrared, which actually penetrates more effectively, but is slightly lower power. And then you see things on the other side of the spectrum like UV. And so UV is actually used for a number of different kind of skin level treatments. But I think most people are aware that if you stay outside and suntan every day, you get too much UV. It can actually trigger downstream issues from a cancer and kind of cellular DNA damage type standpoint. So with light in general, we've focused on the visible light and the infrared light spectrum to make sure that it's as safe as possible to do no harm before we do anything.
All right. So now let's dive into red light therapy. How does light create the type of healing effect that we see? What's the mechanism that's actually happening?
It's an awesome question because we do, even when I started looking into this subject, it seems counterintuitive that you can use light to reduce inflammation and improve oxidative stress levels and regrow cartilage, wound healing. That there's so many different things that sounds like, okay, how can you make all of these claims and that not be snake oil? So to dive into that a bit, with red and infrared light, there are a known number of photoacceptors in the body. And to give one good example for the infrared, because it's a very kind of widespread molecule in the body, hemoglobin is a carrier molecule in the body, and there's four separate kind of attachment points where there are competitive attachment points for oxygen and nitric oxide. And so it's a carrier for kind of the most important cardiopulmonary triggers in the body. And so typically we think about what we like. If you grew up, I was born in the 70s. If you grew up, in my generation, you grew up with kind of a two gas system that's kind of oxygen and carbon dioxide that your body takes oxygen out of the air, distributes to your body for different processes from an energy standpoint, and then you remove carbon dioxide by breathing out. One of the things that's come about in the last really 10 years is the fact that this is essentially this cardiopulmonary system is a three gas system, and we're adding in nitric oxide now. And so we see a number of different applications for this, and that's a whole different rabbit hole to go into. But essentially, one of the big pieces of this is nitric oxide can dilate. It's a dilating factor for blood vessels. And so when we use infrared light to interact with hemoglobin as a photoacceptor, hemoglobin reduces its affinity for binding to nitric oxide. So what that does is put more of this nitric oxide in your blood, open up the capillaries, open up the blood vessels, and deliver more blood to the area, to the local area and the regional area. The other thing that does is one of the things that you see as people age is a stiffening of the cardiovascular endothelial tissue, which is essentially just the walls of your cardiovascular tissue. This stiffening can actually be reversed by having more nitric oxide, by essentially training your body to use nitric oxide more efficiently when this endothelial tissue accepts it and dilates. And so it's almost like an exercise, if I could use the metaphor, kind of an exercise program for your cardiovascular tissue. This is one of the ways where we see these powerful signaling molecules that are triggered by the upstream interaction with light. So we trigger this with hemoglobin. Hemoglobin dumps nitric oxide, and the nitric oxide has a number of different downstream impacts in the body. And one other one I think that's worth noting is that we do interact with a number of different photoacceptors in the mitochondria. And so the mitochondria being the power kind of powerhouses of your cells, if you can reduce the kind of bottlenecks that they have from a energy generation standpoint, then there's a huge amount of downstream signaling that happens with that, which is called mitochondrial retrograde signaling. And this is where you really see within the cells a massive improvement from an oxidative stress standpoint. And so, there's a number of different ways this presents, but these two are good examples of how having a photoacceptor and then these different signaling molecules, you get a really high leverage and outsized response within your physiology, and the adaptations that can come out of there are so powerful. So this this is the kind of base mechanisms, and if you like, we can go down the rabbit hole into all of the different photoacceptors. But this is, I think, it's a good space to open up the science behind this, because it's important for people to understand that this isn't something that's snake oil. There's very well documented signaling pathways from a biochemical standpoint that we know exactly what's happening. Some of these places where you treat your gut right now, and this is a very interesting research space, and sorry for the quick rabbit hole on this one, but when you treat your gut, they now are researching what's called remote photobiomodulation. When you treat your gut with laser therapy, you actually see increases in things like BDNF and different neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine in the brain. And those molecules don't cross the blood-brain barrier. So we're also seeing signaling inside the body that we're still kind of pulling apart. We know kind of ABC, we're triggering this, and this is happening, but there's a C to X, Y, that we know the X, Y, Z because we know the outcomes from it. But the C to X, we're still kind of parsing as a medical community and a research community. So it's a very exciting space to be in from the research side as well.
No, when I was diving into the research, I found just extraordinary science. And if we were to just break that down and summarize what you were talking about right there, we've really got the cytochrome C oxidase, which is the photoreceptor on the mitochondria. And having that work better, you're actually creating improved ATP production. So you're basically improving cellular energy in all the cells that are involved, which, our body's meant to heal. And if you could basically turn up the batteries for all the cells involved, you're going to have better healing. Like you were mentioning before with the hemoglobin and the release of the nitric oxide, that's improves blood flow to the area, which is super important. And then just what I saw in terms of being able to modulate all the inflammatory cytokines in this space too, and basically how tissues remodel. The science behind, red light therapy has been pretty awesome. Now, how did you guys go from, prior to you guys, there had been a lot of large, panel type of red light. How effective are those? Are they dosed in the right way? And how should people start thinking about the use of red light therapy? Should they be owning different, type of devices at different doses? And how do people start to understand? It could get to be very confusing, trying to figure out what dose they should be using for what purpose.
100%. So one of the things that we've seen with the panels, and it's not to knock anyone else's product, because I think that's we generally try to stay positive about things, is that the panels we look at as kind of a first generation product. And so this lets people get introduced into red light and see some level of a result. The downside for it is that it's a very hard to control or to predict dosing for these. And so two reasons for that. One is the foundational kind of mechanisms for red light therapy are based on what's called a biphasic dose curve, which is essentially just a curve like this, where the more you dose, the better results you get up until a peak. And then after that peak, the more you dose, you get worse results. It never goes down below zero, really, as long as you're kind of still within the low level laser therapy or photobiomodulation. But it does reduce the amount of benefit that you get from it. And so these panels are essentially an easier engineering solution. You can strap a bunch of LEDs to a board, get people in front of it, and they'll see somewhere on this curve. The downside for it is it's not on your body, so you don't know how much is going in, and it's with LEDs only, which is essentially LEDs emit light in what's called a Lambertian pattern. They're a chip-based device. They emit in 360 degrees, and then you package them into a little electronic component so that you can put them onto a product, and that constrains them back to 120 degrees. But they also just continue to go out. And so what you see is what's called the inverse square law, which is if you're 2 inches forward or 2 inches back, every unit that you go from a length of distance away, you go half a unit away and you go 10x down in power. So roughly, so you go orders of magnitude changes in dosing from a photon delivery standpoint by moving forward or back by inches. It's not a very good way to kind of keep at the ideal dosing for it. And it's also just not built for penetrating through to internal tissue, because one of the things that we have seen with the panels, if they're dosed as well as they can be, things like wound healing and fibroblast increases in the skin are improved or can be improved with these. But internal tissue where really kind of we feel like the quality of life can be moved, the needle can be moved most for people from a pain and inflammation standpoint, these don't really penetrate through into enough. Or if you turn up the power to where they do have enough power to penetrate the internal tissue, then you oversaturate the more superficial tissue. So it's what we've developed with our models and tens of thousands of hours into modeling and testing this from a physiology standpoint is we have to deliver, we know at what depth these photoacceptors exist and at what order of magnitude they exist and how many photons they need. And so we model very, very carefully and increasing accuracy what we're delivering at those different levels of depth. So that's a bit of a again, sciencey and techie kind of a way to answer, but I think that the key to it is that if you want to dose tissue, if you want to get the best results, you want to dose tissue very targeted and very specifically. And that's why we're able to promise and deliver much more effective results and outcomes than we see from products like the past.
I travel with it all the time since having it. I've got an old shoulder injury, and it's one of those things that allows me just to have some better mobility and less pain when I travel. We know a lot of people are using it for arthritis and joints like that. So what have been the major uses that you have for that? I like to put it around my internal jugulars after I take some methylene blue. So what are the different type of creative uses you found? Well, what are the major ones, and what are some more out of the box when people are using the Move Plus Pro with? Hey, it's Dr. B. Going to take a quick break from the show to talk to you about one of my very favorite biohacks. It is the very compact Kineon Move Plus Pro. I take it with me wherever I travel. I leave it at home as well because it's one of these things that uses patented laser red light therapy to go deep into the tissues to reduce inflammation and to reduce pain. I travel all the time. I work out. I've got these aches and pains that are everywhere. This device has been game changing. There are also some studies suggesting using this can reduce systemic inflammation as well. To find out more about the device, you can go to their website, Kineon.io, or check out the website I did with their founder, Forrest Smith, on episode 181 of the Thrive State podcast. And as a loyal listener to the show, you actually get a very special discount by using the code ThriveStatePC. That's ThriveStatePC for podcast. Trust me, this is one investment in your health and your wellness that you won't forget. So go ahead, get the Move Plus Pro today to take your performance, your health, and get rid of pain for good. Okay, now back to the show.
It's an excellent question. I think one of the things that we started the product design around was being able to dose knees. My partner and I both had knee problems. The entire founding team had knee problems from things like rugby and grappling and American football. Those type of injuries tend to increase inflammation in the joint, in the synovial fluid, and that degrades the tissue much faster, and you see much earlier onset of osteoarthritis because of that. So if you've had injuries in your joints, this is something that you can actually get ahead of and avoid that osteoarthritis or push it back by reducing the inflammation and kind of the degradation of those tissues. So this is one of the big things we see it for is joint injuries, and then old joint injuries that have triggered degradation. For our older users typically have things like osteoarthritis, swelling in the knees, pain, stiffness, creaking, crackling. There's some great kind of medical terms for these, but I'll keep it to the kind of more easily kind of parsed versions. But yeah, that's the main thing we've seen it used for is these type of injuries, recovery, and then longer term injuries where you have an inflammation driven pain is something that we treat extremely effectively. So again, high ankle sprains, and then also things that you see a lot of inflammation around repetitive stress injuries. So people who are taking, going from 1 mile a week to 100 because they want to go do a marathon, they typically have soft tissue issues with their Achilles and with plantar fasciitis and this type of thing. And we deal with that extremely effectively. And so it's been well adopted by kind of CrossFitters, pickleballers, Olympic weightlifters. The Olympic weightlifting team is using our device because it's all repetitive stress injuries, and the same type of things. Golfers, tennis players, anything that you're seeing repetitive stress on joints has been kind of our number one use case. I love the one that you flagged, though, is that there's a great use case for essentially using with methylene blue. These operate on two different molecules in that electron transport chain in your mitochondrial kind of energy processing unit. And we've seen people have great mental impacts for this, neurological impacts in the brain from doing those together. There's also and we've been rolling this out with a small beta test group, which I think is also a kind of, like I said, the marginal or edge cases for it, treating jugular and carotid and all of this in your neck. There's a Japanese study group that has used this type that's called proximal priority therapy. So treating these to kind of essentially treat the blood flow at a very high rate, and then treating the base of the skull and aimed into the brain. And these guys have used this for a couple of different things from a cardiovascular state that work very well. I find that the impacts from using doing that on a daily basis are great for me neurologically. I feel more awake and less brain fog, but I also get sick less. So autoimmune impacts for that are really good. But this study that these Japanese researchers have done with this, one of the most recent ones, and this just shows you how kind of the remote aspect of this treatment can actually have systemic impacts versus just local tissue. They did a study for fertility with I think it was something like a 230 woman group of cohort, and it was women who had been deemed completely infertile, and just by not by treating the local tissue at all, but just by for the uterine or ovarian area, just by treating this proximal priority, they saw over a 2-year period a 29% implantation rate, and I think something like 20% delivery, which is just crazy considering that this was a completely infertile cohort coming in.
That is amazing. What are they feeling are the mechanisms of action that allows this to happen?
So they've theorized a couple of things about this, but one of the main ones is inflammation. We see a lot more systemic inflammation these days, and there's a couple of crazy numbers about this that I'll give you here that have come across my desk just from our research from our team. One of them is, and I think a lot of this comes back to kind of modern diets and lack of movement that people have. But in the early 2000s, I think 2003 or 4 is the exact date. But in the early 2000s, the average onset for adult osteoarthritis, the age was 67. Right now, the average age is 52. That's 20 years. That's barely a generation, and we're seeing these massive differences. And it's really inflammation mediated. This is something where as you have the inflammation increases because dietary changes, because of lack of movement, lack of mobility, lack of training, we're seeing it like the joints actually degrade that much faster. And the same type of thing that you see with cardiovascular disease. Cardiovascular disease is increasing massively, and it's one of the top killers of top mortality factors for adults in America right now. And one of the ways that we see this, that we impact, and that reducing inflammation can impact it, is even if you have, and this is a separate study, but there was an NFL study of 3,500 players, 50% of whom had had an ACL tear, and 50% who hadn't. And you'd think that inflammation would stay local to the joint. What they found over the study was that the 50% who had had the ACL tear, after they had rehabbed it, gone back to playing in the NFL, retired, their incidence 10 years on for severe cardiovascular disease was over 100% higher than those players who hadn't had that ACL tear. And what's happened with that, because we've seen some measurements kind of that close the gap on this from a medical standpoint, from a research standpoint in the meantime, is it reduces inflammation. Having that one source of inflammation that spreads throughout your body reduces the shear strength. It increases the stiffness of your arterial and cardiovascular endothelial tissue. And because of that, the walls of your cardiovascular tissue just aren't as strong. The shear strength is essentially how much, so you have blood going through, like that perpendicular pressure against this kind of cellular tissue there. It's, how much you can resist that is called the shear strength. When you reduce that, you start having severe reactions in the body from it. And it's a really high driver of mortality. And this is one of those things where we're starting to piece together this bigger picture of, what inflammation does, not just locally, but systemically or generally in the body.
Yeah. So it sounds like what we're seeing is a reduction in systemic inflammation with use. Do you find that as people are treating their knee joints that they're getting that benefit later on as well? And is the reason why they're thinking maybe the neck uses for these more systemic issues it's mainly targeting, blood that's actively flowing, that's then going to be taking this systemically as well then?
That's exactly it. And we're still early on, and we have some confounding factors for some of the studies that we're running on this. from our users being able to get these results out, what we're really finding, one of the confounding factors is when people have less pain in their joints, they're moving so much more. So we have, we see a lot of our older users, they're out of pain in their knees now. And so they can get back up and they go from, 200, we track it with them, 200 meters a day to a mile to, and, after 6 months, they're walking 5 miles a day. And it's a big confounding factor for kind of the systemic impacts for it. But we do believe that that does actually help systemically.
Oh, wow. We do have some questions that I get every now and then, people asking about is there a upper limit, or can too much red light therapy be bad for you?
It can, but it never really goes below zero. And again, there's two types of ways of looking at photobiomodulation. So photobiomodulation is kind of a newly agreed on term that includes LEDs and lasers and a lot of different light emission methods. Before, there was a number of different ways of kind of calling this, but one of the ones that's still around is a subsegment of photobiomodulation, which is called low-level laser therapy, or LLLT. With LLLT, you don't really go below zero. You're not going to see damage from this. It's non-ionizing, it's non-ablative. Non-ionizing just means we don't knock the electrons around in a way that kind of UV light does, as an example. Non-ablative just means we don't burn the tissue. So we're not going to heat this up enough to damage it. There is a different type of modality from a treatment standpoint called HILT, or high intensity laser therapy. That actually can overheat tissue, especially if you're applying it for too long. But our devices, we stay in the LLLT kind of range and of power delivery, because again, we want to do no harm and start from there and then start adding the benefits in for the users.
Okay, so I have creative biohackers in my community who just love trying stuff to try stuff. And so, but maybe you have some data. We have people, almost sort of using it as a facial device where they'll just have the lights on in front of their face, thinking that they'll probably be producing collagen. And then I also have some gentlemen, placing the device on their scrotum to try to improve scrotal health. Is there any data for the cosmetic and the sexual health benefits using your specific device?
So we haven't run studies on this, but our dosing is very similar to with the scrotal health and kind of sexual. So there are treatment studies for erectile dysfunction and just general sexual health, and they're very positive. Nitric oxide is a really powerful benefit to the tissue in the area, in the region, and there's very positive studies on this, and I'm happy to send it over so we can kind of get those in the guys' hands. I would say, as a note to them, dosing for that tissue is lower. You don't really have the fat and other types of tissue that you're trying to work through with other parts of your body from a dosing standpoint. So I would suggest, if they're doing that, I think we did the math on it a while back, and it's 3 to 4 minutes versus 15 minutes from a dosing standpoint. There's also some interesting studies on a direct impact on the Leydig cells, which are kind of involved in testosterone production, and again, lower doses, so 2 to 3 to 4 minutes versus the 15 that we do for other parts of the body. But there are positive benefits to it, and we'll get your guys some links back to those so they can kind of modulate that and read it and feel comfortable about it themselves. With the face,
gentlemen, you don't have to use the sock anymore. We got a new device. Pretty stuff. Miss the sock. Use the Kineon. I think that's a new tagline there.
Yes. The first thing that leapt in mind when you said that, though, is our one of our friends has a startup with optically sensed nitric oxide in the bloodstream, and I don't know if they've tried that locally for the kind of sexual organs, but that would be a very interesting one. If we could kind of talk about that offline, if people wanted to do testing, they could potentially do some level of testing with that from a kind of nitric oxide to the area, because it is really helpful for that. For the skin, yes. Also, we actually use, so standard LEDs are 120 degrees. We found from our modeling that if we used for the more superficial tissue an LED that was optically modified to emit at a 30-degree angle of emission, that we penetrated into the skin tissue and really got optimal outcomes from a fibroblast, type 2 collagen, wrinkle reduction, kind of anti-aging outcome. And so, we see people a lot with this, that there are a couple of devices out there that are $4,000 or $5,000, and provide a less optimal. We use our models, so we use Monte Carlo models for showing how light distributes through tissue, and we've built these over time and kind of optimized them relative to physiological tests that we put them in, and we baseline other people's products. And again, we're slightly biased around this. We change our product dosing relative to what the dosing models say, and we see better results because of that in our kind of beta tests and our observational tests with our patients and users. But from what we see from our modeling, we also deliver a more effective dose for skin. And so if you want to hold it onto your skin, I wouldn't hold it away, but just hold it onto the skin for wrinkle reduction. Wound healing is night and day. It's crazy. Like it's my kids actually do this now. When if they fall down and skin their knees, I've got an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old. It's their Wolverine kind of approach. They heal in like no time. It's crazy.
Well, is it dangerous to place over your eyes at all?
No, it's a class 1 device, so it's not dangerous to place over your eyes. Every single emitter in the device is sub 5 milliwatts. It costs us a lot more to be able to break those out and make them so to hit the level of dosing we need, but to make it a number of different parts that we're emitting that dose to make it safer. And actually, it turns out from the modeling standpoint and from our outcomes that it's more efficient and effective in the tissue because of that. But we were essentially doing it for the safety in the first place, and that we've done a good job of our safety teams have done a good job of making sure that this is again not going to damage your retinal tissue either.
Yeah. Okay. Well, just to summarize why it's my favorite travel biohack, this thing is super portable, and I use it for pain all the time. But now we understand there's got really great systemic inflammatory benefits, so it's good for overall health. And there's all these creative ways to use it too. So use it for pain, but try it for some of these other reasons. I think you'll be very, very surprised. But I know that you guys are getting into the vagal nerve space and the gut space. Tell us about the two products that are coming out, the Calm Plus and the Heal Plus.
I love it. It's a very exciting thing. And like I mentioned earlier, our goal as a company is to move the quality of life needle for people. So how can we help people live a higher quality of life? And one of the things that we saw with this is with a number of our users, they were seeing, so two things for the gut. One is the gut is the center. So it's kind of your second brain. It's the center of so many things from a signaling standpoint in the body. There's a direct link through the vagus nerve back to the brain. And we see, again, when we're treating the gut, we found with our current devices that even with the 808 that we have built into the move, we're already seeing benefits for treating the gut by reducing one of the things that you see with the reasons for kind of systemic inflammation is leaky gut. And so people, because of dietary issues, and again, a lot of it also because of lack of training, will have these tight junctions in the gut not be very tight. And so they'll leak kind of inflammation and a number of different things into their bloodstream. And it's really negative impact on, you see brain fog, you see neurological impacts, you see cardiovascular impact, and you see people getting sick more. So autoimmune and immune disorders are just all kind of coming from the gut. So when we started seeing that we were treating this effectively with the 808, we asked the question, how can we most effectively treat this? How can we improve people's gut health in the most powerful way possible? And so we've built a device that doses most effectively into this tissue 4 separate lasers of infrared wavelengths that dose specifically for improving inflammation, reducing inflammation, and improving gut health. And we see some amazing results from it. Again, autoimmune disorders, and there's been some very, and really systemically impactful autoimmune disorders like MS have been having better outcomes by just treating the gut with light. And so, you can kind of, so long COVID reductions, multiple sclerosis, asthma improvements. There's a number of things that really your gut, you don't think of your gut kind of driving, like how is treating my gut going to make my asthma better? But it's an autoimmune disorder, and these mediating factors aren't 100% clear, but the outcomes are. It's really helping people. And so
it's really the same mechanism of action, using photobiomodulation to treat the underlying inflammation, very similar as if you had like a superficial wound and inflammation, correct?
That's exactly it.
Well, give people a background on the science. I mean, you've got the lining of your gut, and 70% of your immune system is on your gut. most of the serotonin that's produced is produced in the gut as well. And what happens is if you eat things that your gut doesn't agree with, if your microbiome is off, it can cause your gut to have these small little leaky tight junctions. And then all of a sudden, what should be in your gut only starts to spill into the bloodstream. All of a sudden, your body's under like, oh my God, we're under attack. Let's bring on the cavalry. And it just turns everything on. You get a lot of inflammation. Then all of a sudden, you might turn on, a police officer that starts going after the good guys in your body. That's how you get autoimmune disease, which is why so many people believe that there's at least a component of gut dysbiosis and dysfunction in many of the diseases that we have here. So it's definitely a great target to treat, a myriad of chronic diseases, including things in the mental health space.
Yes, 100%. And again, that goes back to, and actually kind of opens the door for us to talk a little bit about the Calm Plus, which is a vagus nerve stimulator, an electrical vagus nerve stimulator device. It's our first device that's not a photobiomodulation device. But one of the things that came up while we were doing these gut treatments and testing the early products with our beta users was what we expect in the brain and what we've seen for about 85% of our users is an increase in serotonin, dopamine, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, a number of different really positive chemicals in the brain that increase how you feel and also your neuroplasticity. But there was a non-responsive group that we saw for this. And as we tried to get in, again, our goal is to move people's quality of life. This group is not getting it. Is our dosing off? What's wrong with this? So as we kind of dug in with the science and parsed this, what we found is it wasn't the dosing. It was the communication of that change in the gut back to the brain. And what was triggering this was the vagus nerve is the connecting nerve between the brain and the gut. And it's also a place where you can sense the fight or flight state in the body. And so this is essentially a good place to come in and look at the sympathetic, parasympathetic, autonomic nervous system. And so what we found was these 15% who weren't responding to the gut treatment, it's because they were in fight or flight state. And so the fight or flight state, if you're in the jungle being chased by a tiger, that's really useful. Like you have a lot of different kind of adrenal impacts and you need those because you need to be running from the tiger, and it'll help kind of improve your performance. You run, you get away. If you're working in an office and this is triggered, which often it is, in a state that's chronic, where you have fight or flight state all the time, you're going to have high levels of anxiety. It can actually be linked to depression as well. And it's very hard to stop ruminating. People have a hard time with what they call time to sleep. So you go lay down and then it's 2 hours before you can actually go to sleep. This is all kind of these are all signifying that you'd be in kind of a fight or flight state. And so when we started looking into what the gut changes, why the gut changes weren't impacting the brain, it's because that highway between the brain and the gut was completely locked up with this fight or flight traffic that was between them. And so we developed a stimulating device to be able to get people out of that state and back into a rest and digest state, is what they call it. And so this is something, and immediately 5 minutes in from treatment, we're seeing people drop from 2-hour time to sleep down to 5-minute time to sleep. And it makes a huge impact for their recovery, heart rate variability going through the roof, all of these recovery metrics that you would expect to be off if you're just in a chronic fight or flight state, went back to baseline, and people, it's life-changing for people. So we weren't planning on bringing a product out that's electrical stimulation, but the fact that we could actually impact people's lives with it like that, our team decided this is something that we need to bring to market and make sure that everybody can get the best results out of these. And particularly people who have any of those symptoms where, again, if it takes you a long time to go to sleep, if you're anxious, if you're depressed, there's likely an autonomic underpinning for that. And it's just great to be able to build an extra tool into people's toolkit to be able to deal with this and give themselves a leg up and get back into a healthier state of being, a thrive state.
Oh, I love that you use the word thrive state, because it really is a state of our optimal health. And we cannot be that if we're constantly sympathetic without, having access to brakes on our body as well, which is, the parasympathetic. Are there any additional measurements that you found in terms of uh, brainwave state changes? You talked about HRV, but what are the other studies that have shown that this type of vagal nerve stimulation actually affects the parasympathetic state as a whole?
So there's this EEG data around this, and that's fairly compelling. One of the things that we're seeing, and we're actually moving in that direction ourselves next year from a measurement standpoint, is with functional near infrared spectroscopy. And so you see the EEG is typical kind of more subconscious responses that you see from an electrical standpoint. The functional near infrared spectroscopy is seeing mostly blood flow, and then also again cytochrome deoxidase functionality in different segments of the brain, and those are good markers for it. The barometric reflex and some of the heart based, so respiratory and heart rate, you can actually see heart rate dropping as you're treating this from a vagus interactive standpoint. But it's important for us. One of the things that we've actually taken a commitment on with the Calm Plus is to build in a sensor-based unit. And I hate to harp on it, but our mission as a company is not just to move that quality of life needle for people in the most powerful way we can, it's to measure that. And so we're going to be building in vagal EEG measurements for this, which really hasn't been done before. And we've seen transcranial EEG. We actually see some of the state-of-the-art stuff that's happening in ear EEG right now. But we feel from our early testing with this that vagal and ear EEG are going to be very similar, and that we could actually provide a before and after picture to people showing essentially where you were, and then during treatment, and then short term, middle term, long term, from a strength of signal, and kind of where state of being from an autonomic nervous system standpoint.
Wow. Super excited there. I think, we're going to get our prototype. We can't wait to try both of those new things. And we're going to be looking out for the launch for sure. We're going to have a link and special discount for anybody on this podcast. And again, this is one of these biohacks. I just find it so easy to travel with, and probably a leg up compared to any PBM device. And I can't wait to try the Calm Plus myself as well. But tell us, how do we find out more about Kineon, more about you and all the science, if people want to go deeper?
So you can find us on Instagram, Kineon_labs. We're also at Kineon, KINEON.io on our site. We do a lot of blog publishing there, and we're actually starting to do some collaborative blogs that are coming out of our research into these different subjects. And so it's an exciting space to be from a science standpoint as well. And we also have an upcoming IndieGoGo launch for the Calm Plus and Heal Plus next week. So you can check us out if you search Kineon on IndieGoGo. You'll find us there. I believe the launch is actually the 13th. And the what we do with our community, we had a great response. We spend so much time interacting with our community that they actually tell us how to build a better product. And so with our IndieGoGo launches, we use those to go back and kind of say thank you to our community, and provide essentially the devices at cost to anybody who wants to come adopt this early. And so, the combination of the two devices will be roughly $999 for the Heal Plus and the Calm Plus together once we launch them direct to market. But for our IndieGoGo early adopters, we're doing this for $400, so $399, and it's for anybody who comes in. I believe it's the first week, and then it'll go up. It'll kind of increase slightly over the campaign. But yeah, if you get in early on the 16th of, the 13th of August, you'll get the best price that you'll ever see this device at, or these devices at. And it's it's a way for us to kind of say thank you for our community for being so supportive and providing us with exactly what we need to do to be able to help them get into better health.
Oh, amazing. Now, with everything you've gone through, Forrest, I can't wait to hear the answer to this question, but what has been your best medicine?
My best medicine has been hard work. I think, again, we go back to purpose, and I think this is one of the big pillars. I love your 7 pillars of health and how to get to that thrive state. For me, purpose and executing on purpose and hard work, whether that's physical training, physiological training, lifting, heavy lifting, or working with our teams and building relationship and community by way of the work. It's that finding that purpose and executing on that purpose is really the medicine for me.
My brother, I think the amount of detail and care and passion in your voice when you speak about your work comes through. And so we know you're doing it for the right reasons. It's such an honor to have you here and share your message, and whatever we can do to help, we're on Team Kineon and Team Forrest for sure.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lewis. Really great to spend the time with you, and thank you so much for having such awesome questions and a great interaction today.
Thanks again for being here. Bye.
I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Thrive State podcast. And if you're finding that this content is really helping you and your family members, please consider supporting our mission and our cause of elevating health, happiness, and human potential for people all over the world. You can do so by making sure that you subscribe to this podcast, sharing it with your friends and family members, and leaving us a 5-star review wherever podcasts are heard. All these things are going to really help elevate the show and to give us the resources to continue to bring more content just like this to yourself as well as the people that you love. If you haven't already, you might want to consider joining our community. We actually have a community where people get to engage with me in group sessions where we do breath work, meditation, where we do challenges together, really to be able to get us access to health, happiness, human potential, so that we could have longevity and performance in our life as well. You can check out our community at mythrivestate.com. That's mythrivestate.com. And if you haven't already, pick up a copy of my book, Thrive State. It really gives you all the tools, the pillars that you need to create a blueprint to control the energetics of your life. Who are you? How you show up in the world? The choices that you consistently make create an energy in your body, and you can control this. And when you can control that, you also control the messages you give to your DNA that gives you access, again, to optimal health, longevity, and peak performance. And let me also just share a free gift to you. If you haven't already, please pick up my longevity and performance bundle where I share lecture notes, ebooks, breathwork exercises, and longevity and performance resources at thrivestatestarter.com. Thank you so much for being a part of this community. Thank you for helping us grow. Remember always, my friends, that you are your best medicine.